Welcome back, guys, to Wrong Turn Horror. In today's episode, I'm sharing 10 true creepy encounters at Appalachian Gas Stations. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new horror story. Thank you all. Now let's get into it. Let me take you deep into the backroads of Virginia, to a place where the mountains press in close, and the fog rolls in thick enough to make you feel like you're driving through someone else's dream. This story comes from a man named James, who swears that one late night, while passing through the Virginia-Kentucky border, he stopped at a lonely gas station that was never supposed to be there and met an attendant who wasn't quite alive. James had been on the road for hours that night. He was coming back from a visit with an old college friend in Kentucky, driving east into Virginia. It was around 1:30 in the morning when his gas light blinked on. The backroads in that part of Virginia are winding and isolated, nothing but stretches of pine trees and abandoned barns. Cell service comes and goes, and the radio fills with static between faint gospel channels. He hadn't seen another car in nearly 30 minutes. The night was thick with fog, the kind that hangs low and swallows your headlights whole. His nerves were already on edge when he spotted the glow of a neon sign flickering in the distance. It was an old gas station sitting crooked at the bend of the road. The sign buzzed with half-dead letters, spelling out "open" though the O was burned out. The lot was cracked, weeds breaking through the asphalt, and only one dim overhead light hummed above the pumps. James pulled in, his tires crunching gravel where the pavement had given way. He killed the engine, stepped out, and was struck by how silent everything felt. Not just the quiet of night, but a suffocating, unnatural silence, as if the woods and the insects had paused to listen. He walked inside the station. The door groaned open, and a little bell above it gave a weak jingle. The interior smelled of dust and motor oil. The shelves were half empty, some stocked with old candy bars whose wrappers looked faded, like they'd been sitting there for years. And then he noticed the attendant. An older man stood behind the counter. His skin was pale, almost gray, his uniform faded, with a yellowed name tag that James couldn't quite read. The man didn't move, didn't blink, just stared straight ahead, as if James wasn't even there. "Evening," James said, his voice uneasy, trying to be polite. "Just need some gas." The man didn't answer. Slowly, with stiff, deliberate movement, he lifted one arm and pointed toward the pumps outside. His hand shook slightly, his fingers long and bony. James laughed nervously, muttered a quick thanks, and walked back out. Something about the exchange unsettled him, but he told himself it was just a sleepy old guy working the graveyard shift. At the pump, James fumbled with his card. The machine looked older than any he'd ever seen. Buttons worn smooth, screen barely lit. It still worked, though, and soon the nozzle clicked into his tank. He stood there, eyes darting back to the glass front of the station. The attendant was still there, visible through the grimy window, staring straight ahead like a mannequin. When the tank finally filled, James replaced the nozzle and walked back inside to pay. The bell above the door jingled again, but the station was empty. The counter stood unattended. The register drawer was open, cash sitting inside. The back door hung ajar, swaying slightly with the night air. James froze. He felt that heavy pressure in his chest, the kind of instinct that tells you something is wrong even if you can't explain it. "Hello," he called, his voice shaky. No answer. His skin crawled as he turned in a slow circle, scanning the aisles. He could swear he heard the faint sound of breathing, ragged, shallow, somewhere in the store. His heart pounded. That's when he saw it. Through the dusty front window, across the road, a figure stood in the fog. The same attendant, still silent, watching him. James blinked, rubbed his eyes, but the figure remained. His pale face seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight, his body half hidden by the mist. The fear broke through him like a tidal wave. He didn't stop to think. He sprinted out the door, jumped into his car, and fired up the engine. Gravel flew as he tore out of that lot, his headlights cutting into the fog. His hands shook on the steering wheel, his heart hammering so loud he could barely breathe. For miles, he kept glancing into his rearview mirror, expecting to see headlights behind him, or worse, that pale figure standing in the road. But there was nothing, only the endless fog and the twisting road ahead. When James finally reached a more populated town an hour later, he pulled into a brightly lit gas station, trembling as he stepped out. The clerk there gave him a strange look, asking if he was okay. James tried to laugh it off, but inside he knew something wasn't right. He asked about the station he had stopped at, the one on Highway 58 near the border. The clerk frowned, shook his head, and said, "There hasn't been a station out there in 30 years. Burned down back in the 90s. Attendant died inside, too." James never drove that route again. And sometimes, when he tells the story, he swears that if he closes his eyes, he can still see the man standing in the fog, pointing silently toward the pumps. They say the backroads of Virginia hide things better left forgotten. And maybe, just maybe, not every light in the fog is a sign of safety. Sometimes it's a trap waiting to pull you in. A young woman named Emily, who was driving through Boone, North Carolina late one night when she stopped for gas. She thought she was alone until she noticed a dog waiting by the pumps. But what she discovered was something far worse than a stray animal. Emily was the kind of person who hated long night drives. Her friends knew it. Her family knew it. She would always avoid being on the road after sundown. But that particular Friday, she had no choice. Her grandmother had fallen ill in Asheville, and Emily had driven up from Charlotte to visit. By the time she was heading back home, the clock was nearing midnight. The stretch of road she chose wound through Boone, a small Appalachian town hugged tightly by the Blue Ridge Mountains. It was early spring, and a cool mist clung to the asphalt, swirling in her headlights. Emily's gas light had come on about 20 minutes earlier, and she'd been searching nervously for a station. The last thing she wanted was to run out of fuel in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by endless forest. Finally, she spotted it. A lone gas station glowing faintly in the dark, its fluorescent canopy lights buzzing like angry insects. Relieved, she turned in, her tires crunching over gravel as she pulled up to one of the pumps. That's when she saw it, the dog. It sat just a few feet away at the edge of the lot. Medium-sized, shaggy, its fur patchy in places. Its eyes caught the overhead light, gleaming an odd shade of amber. At first, Emily smiled. She'd always loved animals, and the dog seemed harmless, even friendly. It wagged its tail slowly, as if waiting for her. "Hey there, buddy," she whispered, stepping out of the car. The dog tilted its head, watching her carefully. Emily grabbed the nozzle and began pumping gas, all the while keeping an eye on the animal. It didn't move, didn't bark, just sat there in the shadows of the lot. When her tank was nearly full, the dog finally rose to its feet. It padded closer, its paws silent on the pavement. Emily expected it to stop a few feet away, maybe sniff the air, maybe beg for food. But it kept walking right up to the car. Something about the way it moved made her uneasy. Its gait was jerky, uneven, like it wasn't used to walking on four legs. Still, Emily crouched slightly, holding out her hand. "You hungry, boy?" "Sorry, I don't have anything with me." The dog wagged its tail once more, but then it did something that made her blood turn cold. It stood up. Slowly, unnaturally, the animal rose onto its hind legs. Its back cracked as it straightened, its head lolling to the side with a wet pop. In the pale light of the station, Emily saw its face shift. Not the friendly snout of a dog, but something longer, stretched, its mouth curling into a grin full of human-like teeth. Emily stumbled backward, slamming against her car. The nozzle slipped from her hand, gas spilling onto the pavement. Her heart thundered in her chest, each beat echoing in her ears. The creature pressed its long, almost human hands against the window of her driver's side door. Its claws scraped the glass with a sickening screech. And then, in a voice low and guttural, it whispered something she'll never forget. "Let in." Emily screamed, fumbling for her keys. Her hands shook so violently she dropped them twice before managing to wrench the door open and throw herself inside. She locked the doors, hit the ignition, and slammed her foot on the gas. The tires screeched, the car fishtailed, and she tore out of that lot with her heart racing. In the rearview mirror, she saw the thing drop back on all fours and chase after her for several yards. Its limbs bent the wrong way, its body jerking violently like a puppet on strings. Then just as suddenly it stopped. It stood in the glow of the station lights, watching her car vanish into the fog. Emily drove for miles, refusing to slow down. Tears blurred her vision as she tried to convince herself it wasn't real, that maybe exhaustion had played tricks on her. But when she finally stopped at a brightly lit rest area further down the highway, she saw them. Muddy, clawed handprints streaked across the side of her car door. Handprints that weren't there before. She didn't tell anyone at first, afraid people would think she'd gone crazy. But weeks later, while scrolling through local forums, Emily found a thread about strange sightings near Boone. Stories of dog-like things lurking near gas stations, rest stops, and lonely roads. Some called them skinwalkers. Others said they were spirits trapped between forms, doomed to wander. A few even swore the creatures would mimic animals to lure people closer. Whatever Emily saw that night, she knows one thing for certain. It wasn't a dog. The Blue Ridge Mountains are full of legends. Creatures that wear familiar skins, waiting for the right moment to reveal what lies beneath. So the next time you stop for gas in the dead of night and see a stray waiting in the shadows, think twice before you reach out your hand. Charleston, West Virginia. It comes from a truck driver who was passing through the mountains just before dawn when he stopped at a gas station to use the restroom. What he found inside wasn't just eerie. It was something that still haunts him every time he closes his eyes. His name was Daniel, a trucker with nearly 20 years of experience hauling goods across the country. Long nights and endless highways were nothing new to him. He'd seen it all: strange lights in the sky, hitchhikers who seemed to vanish, towns that felt half dead even in the middle of the day. But nothing prepared him for what happened that morning. It was late winter, bitter cold. The mountains around Charleston were draped in fog and ice, the kind of mist that sticks to your windshield and makes you lean forward in your seat, squinting to see the road. Daniel had been driving since midnight and was exhausted. His eyelids felt heavy, his shoulders sore. When he spotted the dim glow of a gas station sign just off the highway, he figured it was the perfect place to stretch his legs and grab a coffee. The station was old, squat, with a cracked parking lot and a single canopy light flickering above the pumps. Daniel pulled in, cut the engine, and sat for a moment in silence. Something about the place felt too still. He didn't see another car, no movement inside the glass doors, just shelves dimly lit in the distance. But he shook it off. He needed to use the restroom more than anything. Inside, the air smelled faintly of mildew and stale coffee. A radio crackled behind the counter, playing faint gospel music. The clerk, a man in his 50s with a heavy mustache, nodded without a word as Daniel passed by. The restroom was tucked in the back, down a narrow hallway lined with faded posters warning about lottery tickets and old cigarette ads. When Daniel pushed open the restroom door, the hinges squealed. The light inside was dim, buzzing faintly, casting a yellow glow over cracked tiles and a sink stained with rust. He headed for the urinal, trying not to think too much about the grimy condition of the place. That's when he heard it. Soft sobbing. It was faint at first, so faint that he thought it might have been the pipes creaking or the hum of the lights. But as he stood there, the sound grew clearer. A child's voice. A little girl, crying. Daniel froze. His eyes darted toward the stalls. All were closed. He crouched slightly, peering under the doors, and that's when he saw them, small feet in scuffed, dirty shoes. They didn't move. They just stood there, toes pointing inward, trembling. "Hey, you okay in there?" Daniel asked, his voice low but kind. The sobbing hitched, like the girl had heard him but wasn't sure how to respond. He took a step closer, careful not to startle her. "Do you need help? Where's your mom or dad?" No answer, just louder crying, ragged and broken. Concern overtook caution. Daniel pressed his palm against the stall door and pushed gently. It swung open with a groan. The stall was empty. Daniel's stomach dropped. The sobbing cut off instantly, leaving only the buzzing of the overhead light. He staggered back, glancing under the stalls again. Nothing. The little feet were gone. For a long moment, he stood frozen in that restroom, his breath clouding in the cold air. He could feel the weight of someone's presence, though he was completely alone. Goosebumps prickled along his arms, his instincts screaming at him to leave. He splashed water on his face, trying to steady himself, and then pushed open the restroom door. The hallway felt colder now, the shadows deeper. As he passed the front counter, the clerk gave him a long look, as if he knew something. Daniel muttered a quick thanks and hurried outside. The cold morning air hit him hard, and he let out a shaky breath of relief. He climbed back into his truck, started the engine, and was just about to pull away when movement caught his eye. Under the lone streetlight at the edge of the lot, she stood there. A little girl, no older than 8, in a tattered dress that looked decades out of place. Her hair hung in dark, damp strands over her face. She stared directly at him, her eyes hollow, too dark, like pits that swallowed the light. Daniel's hands shook on the steering wheel. He blinked, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. But the girl didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there, silent, the fog curling around her ankles. Panic surged through him. He threw the truck into gear and pulled out of the lot, tires squealing on the cracked pavement. In his side mirror, he saw her figure fading into the fog until she was swallowed completely. He didn't stop until he reached a crowded truck stop 2 hours down the highway. Even then, when surrounded by people and light, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd brought something with him. For weeks afterward, Daniel avoided West Virginia routes. He told a few close friends about what he'd seen, but most laughed it off as exhaustion or imagination. Yet Daniel knew what he'd heard: the sobbing, the shoes, the hollow-eyed girl under the streetlight. Later, through whispered conversations with other truckers, he learned he wasn't the only one. The gas station near Charleston had a reputation. People spoke of a girl who had vanished there in the late 70s, taken from her parents while they fueled up. They never found her body. Some say she was killed near the station, her spirit trapped in the place she was last seen alive. And on quiet mornings, just before dawn, her sobs still echo from the restroom stalls. Narrators close. Some places never forget tragedy. They hold on to it, replaying it for anyone unlucky enough to stumble through. So if you ever stop at a lonely gas station on the backroads of West Virginia and hear crying from the restroom, think carefully before you look under the stall. A man named Mark, who was driving through the Tennessee mountains late one night when he stopped at a gas station that didn't feel right. What he saw while filling up left him questioning whether he was truly alone or standing beside something that never should have been there. Mark had been working construction jobs all across the South. That winter, he was coming back from a project near Chattanooga, heading toward his hometown tucked in the foothills of Virginia. The trip usually took about 6 hours, but Mark was tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that made every mile feel longer than the last. By the time he reached the Tennessee mountain roads, it was nearly midnight. The air was cold, thin, and the fog pressed tight against the windshield like a living thing. These roads were winding, carved into the hillsides with steep drops and sharp turns. His gas light blinked on just as he realized he hadn't passed a station in more than 40 miles. He cursed under his breath, eyes darting nervously between the winding road and the fuel gauge. He prayed for a break, and not 10 minutes later, he spotted it, a faint glow ahead. A gas station, sitting crooked at the bend of the mountain highway. Relieved, he pulled in. The place looked ancient, like something out of the 1960s. The pumps were old mechanical ones with the spinning dials, their paint chipped and flaking. A faded sign above the canopy creaked in the wind. The lot was cracked, overgrown in places, and there wasn't another car in sight. Mark figured it was better than nothing. He stepped out, breath clouding in the cold night air, and slid the nozzle into his tank. The pump groaned to life, numbers ticking slowly on the dial. That's when he noticed he wasn't alone. At the pump directly across from his, a man stood still. Very still. Mark hadn't noticed him when he pulled in. There had been no headlights, no sound of another engine. Yet there he was. The stranger wore clothes that looked wrong. Old suspenders over a grimy shirt, a wide-brimmed hat shadowing his face. His skin was pale, almost chalky, and he stood stiff as a statue, one hand resting lightly on the pump handle, though he didn't seem to be using it. At first, Mark thought maybe it was just another traveler. But then he realized the man wasn't moving. At all. Not a twitch. Not a blink. Just staring, head tilted slightly in Mark's direction. A chill crept up Mark's spine. "Evening," he said nervously, offering a polite nod. The stranger didn't reply, didn't even acknowledge him, just stood there. Mark's throat went dry. He tried to focus on the pump, watching the slow crawl of the numbers. But every time he glanced up, the man was still staring, unblinking, his pale face partially visible under the brim of his hat. Mark felt the pressure of dread building in his chest. Something about the man was wrong. Not just his stillness, but the way the air around him felt heavier, like the night itself was bending closer to listen. Finally, the pump clicked. The tank was full. Mark exhaled, relieved, and turned to replace the nozzle. When he looked back across the lot, the man was gone. Not walking away, not climbing into a car. Gone. The pump across from his was still running, fuel pouring onto the cracked asphalt, soaking into the dirt. Mark's stomach dropped. He stared at the steady stream of gas, his ears filled with the hiss and splash. But there was no sign of the stranger. The lot was empty. Mark's instinct screamed at him to get back in his truck. He fumbled with his keys, his hands trembling, and climbed inside. As he turned the ignition, the shadows around the station seemed to grow deeper, thicker, like the darkness itself was pressing in. In his rearview mirror, just before pulling out, he thought he saw it again, a pale face half hidden under a hat, watching from the tree line at the edge of the lot. But when he blinked, it was gone. Mark drove hard that night, refusing to stop again until he reached Knoxville. He told himself he must have imagined it, that exhaustion had played tricks on his eyes. But weeks later, when he mentioned it to a local, the man's face turned grim. "There's an old station up there in the mountains," the local said quietly. "Burned down back in the 70s. Attendant died at the pumps. Folks say he still stands watch, waiting for company. And if you ever see him, don't look too long. He doesn't like being noticed." Mark doesn't take that road anymore. He'll go 30 miles out of his way to avoid it. Because deep down, he knows what he saw wasn't just a trick of the fog or his tired mind. It was something real, something still standing by the pumps in the Tennessee mountains, waiting for the next traveler who needs gas. Narrator's close. The mountains hide many secrets, and sometimes the light of an old gas station doesn't mean safety, it's an invitation. So if you find yourself filling up at a pump in the dead of night, and someone across the lot won't stop staring, don't wait to find out if they're really alive. This story was shared by a woman named Rachel, who had a late-night encounter inside a rural Kentucky gas station. What she saw that night made her question the difference between the living and the dead. Rachel had grown up in Louisville, but she often drove the backroads of Kentucky to visit her grandmother in the Appalachian Foothills. The roads were long and lonely, especially in the hollows, narrow valleys where the mountains pressed in tight and the mist never seemed to lift. One summer evening, Rachel set out later than planned. Her grandmother lived nearly 3 hours away, and by the time she reached the hollows, it was already close to midnight. The two-lane road dipped and wound endlessly, no streetlights, no towns in sight. Her headlights carved a narrow path through the darkness, catching glimpses of sagging barns, rusted trailers, and abandoned coal trucks. That's when her gas light came on. Her heart sank. She hadn't passed the station in over 40 miles, and her GPS offered no comfort, just a flat gray signal loss. She pressed on, praying. Finally, around a bend, she saw it. A small gas station tucked against the tree line, glowing faintly in the fog. Its neon sign flickered weakly, buzzing against the silence. Relieved, Rachel pulled in. The place looked old but open. One car was parked off to the side, a beat-up sedan with its hood up, but no one around it. She ignored it, focusing on the warm light spilling from inside the station. She filled her tank quickly, eager to be back on the road. But her stomach growled. She hadn't eaten since noon. Deciding to grab a snack, she walked inside. The bell above the door jingled. The air smelled of dust and old coffee. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, flickering in spots. The aisles were narrow, shelves lined with outdated snacks and faded soda bottles. Behind the counter stood a young clerk. Thin, pale, with sandy hair tucked under a cap. He looked no older than 19. His uniform was faded, the name tag, so worn Rachel couldn't make out the letters. The boy didn't smile, but he greeted her softly. "Evening." Relieved to see someone, Rachel smiled back. "Evening. Long night. Place is kind of in the middle of nowhere, huh?" The clerk just nodded. His eyes seemed distant, almost sad. She grabbed a bag of chips and a soda, then placed them on the counter. As he rang her up, she noticed his hands. They were strangely colorless, veins faintly visible like parchment stretched too thin. "Been here long?" she asked, trying to make small talk. He hesitated. "Long enough." The way he said it chilled her, but she forced a polite laugh. She paid in cash, thanked him, and left. The cool night air felt strangely heavy as she walked back to her car. She slid inside, unwrapped her chips, and glanced at the station one last time. That's when she saw it. Through the glass windows, behind the counter, there was no one there. The clerk was gone. Confused, Rachel looked around. She hadn't seen him leave. No door opened, no sound of movement. Just gone. She thought maybe he'd stepped into a back room. But as she stared, her eyes adjusted to the dim light inside, and she saw something she hadn't noticed before. The counter was covered in dust. Thick, untouched dust. The register was dark, unplugged. The shelf in the aisle sagged. Some collapsed entirely. It was impossible. She had just bought chips. She had just handed him cash. She looked at the bag in her hand, her pulse pounding. The logo on the chips was wrong. An old brand she hadn't seen since childhood, discontinued years ago. The soda can was dented, the label faded and torn. Her breath quickened. She started the car, desperate to leave. As her headlights cut across the lot, she glanced once more at the station. The lights inside were out. The neon sign above the door had gone dark. And in the reflection of the glass door, just for a second, she swore she saw the clerk standing there. Watching her leave, his pale face pressed against the glass. Rachel floored it, the gravel spitting beneath her tires as she sped back onto the highway. She didn't stop until she reached her grandmother's house, where she sat in the driveway, hands trembling, staring at the bag of chips on the passenger seat. When she showed them to her grandmother the next morning, the bag was gone. In its place was a crumpled, yellowed receipt. The date printed at the top was from 1984. Sometimes the gas stations that promise safety on the back roads aren't open anymore. Not to the living, anyway. So if you walk into one late at night and the clerk looks a little too pale, a little too quiet, take your change and leave fast. Because some counters are manned by those who never stopped working, even after death. Story comes from a truck driver named James, who swore he met someone at a gas station deep in the West Virginia coal roads. Someone who never spoke, but whose silence was more terrifying than any words could ever be. James had been hauling freight for nearly 20 years. He knew every back road, every coal route carved into the Appalachian hills. But no matter how many miles he drove, he never forgot one night in particular. The night he stopped at a gas station just outside Logan, West Virginia. It was the fall of 1998. The roads were quiet, slick with mist, the trees bare and skeletal against the hillsides. James had been running late, his delivery schedule pushing him through the night. By 2 a.m., his eyes were heavy, and his fuel gauge hovered near empty. Coal roads were dangerous in the dark. Winding curves, sudden drops, and no guardrails to save you if you drifted too far. James prayed for a stop, and when he crested a hill, he spotted it, a dim light glowing in the distance. A gas station. Relieved, he pulled in. The lot was cracked, weeds growing through the pavement. The building looked old, patched with rusted siding. But the pumps were working, humming faintly in the cold night air. He stepped out, his boots crunching gravel. The station was silent, too silent. No music from speakers, no insects chirping, no distant dogs barking. Just the hollow wind threading through the trees. James began pumping gas. That's when he noticed the attendant. The man stood under the canopy, half hidden in shadow. Tall, thin, dressed in a grease-stained uniform with no logo. His cap was pulled low, face pale under the yellow light. James nodded politely. "Evening." The man didn't respond. He just stood there, hands tucked behind his back, watching. James felt uneasy. Attendants usually offered to help, clean windshields, anything to keep business moving. But this one didn't move, didn't blink, didn't speak. just stared with an intensity that made James's skin crawl. The pump clicked. James replaced the nozzle, his hands trembling slightly. He forced a laugh. "Quiet type, huh?" Still nothing. The man tilted his head just slightly, as though curious, but the motion was jerky, unnatural, like a puppet string had been pulled. James's throat tightened. He opened the truck door quickly, sliding inside. But before he shut it, he glanced once more at the attendant. The man was smiling. Wide, too wide. His teeth looked gray, sharp at the edges, like they hadn't seen daylight in decades. James slammed the door and started the engine. As his headlights flared across the lot, he saw the attendant still standing there, hands behind his back, smile fixed and unblinking. But then the man moved. In an instant, he was closer, 10 feet nearer to the truck, though James hadn't seen him walk. He was just suddenly there, the smile stretched wider, his pale eyes catching the light. James threw the truck into gear and tore out of the lot, gravel spitting under his tires. His heart hammered as he watched the rearview mirror. The attendant hadn't chased him. He was still standing under the canopy, watching. But as the station faded into the distance, James thought he saw him raise one hand slowly, like a wave or maybe a beckon. For miles afterward, James couldn't shake the feeling he was being followed. Every shadow along the road looked like that pale figure. Every set of headlights behind him made his stomach twist. When he finally reached the next town, he stopped at a diner. The waitress noticed how shaken he looked and asked what was wrong. James told her about the station, the silent man, the smile. The waitress's face went pale. "Which road?" she asked. James described the route. She shook her head slowly. "That station burned down 20 years ago. Attendant died inside. Folks say he still waits out there, silent as ever. Some nights he'll smile at you, and if you're unlucky enough to see it up close, you won't be driving away." James never took that road again. Even now, decades later, he swears he can still feel the weight of that stare when he drives through West Virginia at night. And he'll tell you, silence isn't always empty. Sometimes, silence is what watches you. So if you're ever on the coal roads of West Virginia and you stop for gas, pay attention to the attendant. If he doesn't speak, if he only smiles, leave. Because not every station is meant for the living. A man named Daniel, who was driving late one night through the backroads of Virginia. What he saw near a lonely gas station would haunt him for the rest of his life, because not every traveler you meet out there is human. Daniel was a college student in the late 90s, traveling home to visit his parents in Roanoke, Virginia. His campus was 3 hours away, tucked near the Blue Ridge Mountains, and he often made the trip on weekends. One night in October, after pulling a late study session, Daniel hit the road close to midnight. The backroads were quicker than the interstate, but they were also darker, lonelier, and notorious for strange happenings. He didn't believe in ghost stories, though. At least, not yet. The air was sharp with the smell of fallen leaves, the moon hidden behind rolling clouds. His headlights cut across empty fields and thick woods that seemed to press closer with every mile. By the time his gas light blinked on, he realized he hadn't passed another car in nearly 40 minutes. Nerves rising, Daniel prayed for a station. At last, he spotted one. A squat building with 2 pumps out front, its neon sign flickering weakly against the black sky. The place looked deserted. The lot cracked, the windows fogged with grime. But the lights were on, and that was enough. Daniel pulled in, killed the engine, and stepped out. The night was still. Too still. Not even crickets sang. He slid the nozzle into his tank, listening to the sluggish gurgle of fuel. That's when he noticed movement at the edge of the lot. A woman. She was walking slowly out of the tree line, barefoot, her dress long and crimson red. The fabric clung to her as though wet, but there hadn't been rain in days. Her hair was black, hanging in heavy strands down her face. Daniel froze. She stopped just beyond the pumps, standing in the glow of the overhead light. Her head tilted downward, her arms hanging limply at her sides. The red dress shimmered faintly, dark patches spreading across it like stains. Ma'am," Daniel called out, his voice tight. The woman didn't reply. Instead, she lifted her head slowly. Her face was pale, almost colorless, with hollow eyes that caught the light in a way that made Daniel's stomach churn. Her lips parted, but no sound came out, just a faint rasp, like air whistling through broken glass. Daniel's pulse hammered. He told himself maybe she was in trouble, maybe she needed help, but every instinct screamed at him to stay away. The pump clicked, and Daniel nearly jumped out of his skin. He yanked the nozzle free, shoved it back into place, and turned toward his car. When he glanced back, the woman was closer. She hadn't walked. He hadn't seen her move, but now she stood directly across from his car, no more than 15 feet away. Her head cocked to one side, her dark hair dripping onto the cracked pavement. Daniel's throat tightened. He fumbled with his keys, trying to steady his hands. The woman raised one arm slowly, pointing at him with a trembling finger. Her lips moved. This time a whisper slithered out. "Stay." Daniel's blood turned cold. He tore open the car door, jumped inside, and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. Through the windshield, he saw her face clearly now. Her mouth was stretched too wide, impossibly wide, lips tearing at the corners as she smiled. Her eyes rolled white, gleaming in the dim light. Daniel slammed the gear shift into drive and tore out of the lot, gravel spitting beneath his tires. He didn't look back. He couldn't. But as he sped down the dark back road, headlights slicing through the mist, he glanced once into the rearview mirror. She was there, not on the road, not running, but sitting in the back seat. Her red dress pooled across the vinyl, her pale face reflected in the glass, still smiling, still whispering one word over and over. "Stay," Daniel screamed, swerving wildly, the car fishtailing before he regained control. When he looked back, the seat was empty. He drove the rest of the way home in silence, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, too afraid to even blink. The next morning, shaken, he told his parents. His father went pale and shook his head. "Some people talk about her. They say there's a woman who haunts the old gas station on the back road. Died there in the 60s. Some kind of accident, fire, maybe, always in a red dress. If you see her, you don't stop. You don't talk. And you never, ever let her get close." Daniel never used that back road again. Even today, decades later, he swears he still sees flashes of red when he drives past dark stations at night. Because some travelers don't want to ride. They want you to stay forever. The backroads of Virginia are quiet, but not empty. So if you're ever filling up a lonely gas station and you see a woman in red walking out of the trees, don't stay. Drive and don't look back. Stephen, who swore that one late-night stop at a gas station off a highway in North Carolina turned into the most terrifying moment of his life. Because sometimes it's not what you see outside that matters. It's what finds you when you're trapped inside your car. Stephen was 24, working his first real job out of college. He had taken a sales position that required constant travel, bouncing from small towns across North Carolina to meet clients. The pay was decent, but the hours were brutal. On a rainy November night, Stephen was heading home after a long week on the road. His route took him down Highway 421, a stretch known for its endless pine trees, abandoned motels, and gas stations that seemed frozen in time. The rain came down hard, pounding the windshield, wipers squealing with every pass. He was exhausted. His eyes burned, and his gas light had been on for 10 miles. Relief flooded him when a faded sign appeared through the rain. Fuel, 24 hours. Stephen pulled off the highway and into the station. The lot was slick with water, neon buzzing faintly above the pumps. Only one other car sat in the lot. A rusted van, no lights on, no one inside. He parked at a pump, shut off the engine, and leaned back for a moment, closing his eyes. He told himself he'd just rest for a second before fueling up. That's when it came. Knock, knock, knock. 3 sharp taps against the driver's side window. Stephen's eyes flew open. His heart jumped into his throat. Outside, pressed against the glass, was a face. A man, gaunt, pale, rain dripping down his hollow cheeks. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and his lips pulled into a smile that was far too large, showing gray, uneven teeth. Stephen yelped, fumbling for the lock button, though the doors were already locked. The man didn't flinch. He just kept smiling, water streaming down his face as his hand pressed flat against the window. "Stephen Mouth, what do you want?" The man tilted his head, his smile never breaking. Slowly, he raised his other hand and tapped the glass again. Knock, knock, knock. Stephen's breath came in shallow gasps. He glanced around the lot. Still empty, still silent except for the rain. The van hadn't moved. The station lights flickered overhead. The man outside leaned closer, his face nearly pressed against the glass, his breath fogging the window despite the rain. His eyes locked on Stephen's with a feral intensity. Then, in one sudden motion, his smile dropped. His lips parted. "Open it." The voice was muffled through the glass, but the word was clear. Stephen shook his head violently, mouthing no. The man's expression twisted, anger flashing across his face. He slammed his hand against the glass, harder this time. Bang, bang, bang. Stephen started the engine, heart pounding. His headlights flared across the lot, cutting through the sheets of rain. The man outside didn't move. He just stood there, dripping, eyes blazing, fist pressed against the glass. Stephen threw the car into reverse. Tires spun on the wet pavement before catching. He whipped the wheel, tearing out of the lot and back toward the highway. But just before he merged back onto the road, something made him glance at the rearview mirror. The man wasn't in the lot anymore. He was standing in the middle of the highway, somehow already there, framed in the red glow of Stephen's taillights. And even from that distance, Stephen swore he could hear it. 3 faint knocks echoing inside his car. Knock, knock, knock. Stephen made it home that night, shaken, trembling, and too afraid to sleep. The next morning, in daylight, he drove back to that same exit, determined to prove to himself it had just been exhaustion, maybe a nightmare behind the wheel. But when he pulled into the lot, his stomach dropped. The station was boarded up. The windows shattered, the pumps rusted and broken. A sign hung crooked on the door, closed permanently. 1993. Stephen stared in disbelief. Closed for years. But he had been there. He had heard the neon buzzing. He had seen the man. Or maybe the man had seen him. Sometimes, it's not the storm or the darkness that you should fear on the highway. It's the sound of someone knocking on your window, someone who shouldn't be there. So if you ever wake up to the sound of tapping glass, don't open it. Because once you do, you might never drive away again. Story comes from a traveler named Emily, who was driving through the Smoky Mountains when she pulled into a gas station that seemed completely abandoned. But what she discovered inside made her realize, just because a place looks empty doesn't mean you're alone. Emily was a nurse, used to long shifts and sleepless nights. One fall weekend, she decided to take a drive through the Smoky Mountains to visit an old friend in Gatlinburg. The roads were quiet, carved through dense forests where mist clung like cobwebs between the trees. By the time she began her return trip home, the sun had long set. The sky was pitch black, and the twisting mountain roads were harder to navigate than she remembered. Her gas gauge slid dangerously low, and she hadn't seen another car in almost an hour. When the faint glow of a gas station appeared ahead, relief washed over her. She pulled in quickly, headlights sweeping across cracked asphalt and faded paint. The building looked old, its windows dark, its sign flickering faintly. But the pump still stood upright, and one even hummed faintly when she parked beside it. Emily shut off the engine and climbed out. The night was eerily still, the air damp and heavy with the scent of pine. She tried the pump. To her surprise, fuel flowed smoothly. As she filled her tank, she glanced toward the station's front windows. The glass was smeared with grime, but she thought she saw movement inside. A shadow, flickering past the counter. Her heart skipped. Someone was in there. Needing a snack for the long drive, she decided to check it out. The bell above the door jingled softly when she stepped inside. The air smelled wrong, stale like mildew and old wood. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, though half of them were dead, leaving the aisles in shadow. Dust coated the shelves. The refrigerators along the back wall were empty, doors smeared with fingerprints. "Hello," Emily called out. Her voice echoed through the space. No answer. She walked slowly down an aisle, her shoes crunching on something brittle. Old wrappers. Dead insects. Her pulse quickened. The place looked like it hadn't been touched in years, yet she swore she'd seen someone. At the counter, she rang the bell. Its sharp chime echoed far too loud in the stillness. That's when she heard it. A whisper. Not words, exactly. Just the softest of breath. From the back of the store. Emily froze. "Hello," she said again, her voice trembling. The whisper grew louder, like multiple voices layered over one another, all murmuring just out of reach. Suddenly, the lights flickered. The hum of electricity surged, and for a brief second, she saw them. Figures. Dozens of them. Standing in the aisles, pressed against the refrigerators, hunched behind the counter. Pale, gray-skinned shapes with hollow eyes, their mouths moving in unison, whispering words she couldn't understand. And then, darkness. The lights snapped out completely. Emily's breath caught. The whispers swelled, filling the space, crawling over her skin. She spun toward the door, stumbling over debris, nearly falling as she pushed through the exit into the night. The lot outside was empty, silent. The building behind her stood dark, no lights, no hum of pumps. The bell on the door hadn't rung when she shoved it open. Her car sat alone under the canopy. The tank already full, though she hadn't finished fueling. Emily scrambled inside, hands shaking, and started the engine. She peeled out of the lot, headlights sweeping across the old building one last time. Through the filthy windows, she saw them again. The figures, packed shoulder to shoulder, their faces pressed against the glass, watching her leave. She didn't look back again. The next day, curious and still shaken, Emily asked her friend about the station. His face grew pale when she described it. That place? It shut down in the 80s. Explosion in the back room. Killed a bunch of people, customers, clerk, everyone inside. They say the building was condemned. Shouldn't even have power running to it. Emily knows what she saw. She knows what she heard. And every time she drives through the Smokies now, she makes sure her tank is full before dark. Because she's certain that station is still out there, waiting. Not every empty station is truly empty. Some are still filled with voices, with whispers, with eyes that never stop watching. So if you ever walk inside and it feels abandoned, don't stay. Because you may not walk out alone. Tonight's story is about a late-night driver who thought he was doing a good deed when he picked up a stranded hitchhiker near an old Appalachian gas station. But sometimes, kindness can lead you into the darkest encounters of your life. It was late autumn in the Appalachian Foothills, the kind of night where the sky looks bruised with heavy clouds and the mountains breathe out thick fog. A man named Jason was driving back to North Carolina after visiting family in Kentucky. His route took him down narrow mountain roads, past patches of forest that seemed endless, their skeletal branches clattering in the cold wind. Jason wasn't nervous. He liked driving at night. Something about the silence of the road made him feel at peace. But as the miles rolled on, he realized he was running low on gas. His gauge hovered just above empty, and there wasn't another car in sight. Finally, after what felt like forever, Jason spotted a faint glow ahead. A gas station. Relief washed over him, and he pulled in quickly, parking under the flickering canopy lights. The place looked old, too old. The sign was missing letters. Weeds pushed through cracks in the pavement, and the windows of the building were fogged with grime. But the pump still looked functional, and that's all he cared about. He stepped out, his breath puffing in the cold air. As he pumped gas, he noticed something strange. Just beyond the lot, at the edge of the woods, someone stood watching him. A man. Tall, thin, shoulders hunched beneath a faded jacket. His face was hidden by the shadows, but Jason could see enough to know he was staring directly at him. Jason tried to ignore it at first. Maybe he was just a drifter or someone passing through. But when the pump clicked and Jason replaced the nozzle, the man stepped closer. His movements were stiff, unnatural, like each step was forced. Jason quickly got back into his car, locking the doors. He told himself he'd just drive off and forget about it. But before he could put the car in gear, there was a knock at his window. Jason jumped. The man was standing right there now, his face pale and gaunt, eyes dark and sunken. "You headed south?" the man asked, his voice flat, almost mechanical. Jason hesitated. He wanted to say no, wanted to drive away, but something about the man's expression froze him. Against his better judgment, Jason unlocked the passenger door. The man slid inside without another word. His clothes smelled damp like wet earth. He clutched a small canvas bag in his lap and stared straight ahead as Jason pulled out of the station. For a long while, the car was silent except for the sound of the engine. Jason tried to break the tension. "Where you headed?" The man didn't look at him. "Doesn't matter. Just drive." Jason gripped the wheel tighter. He told himself it was fine, that he'd drop the guy off at the next town. But as the miles passed, he noticed things. The man never blinked. His breathing was too quiet, too controlled. And when Jason glanced at his hands gripping the bag, he saw his fingernails were blackened, cracked, like they'd been digging in dirt. Finally, Jason worked up the nerve to ask, "Were you stranded back there?" The man slowly turned his head, and Jason's stomach dropped. His eyes weren't just dark, they were hollow. Deep, empty sockets where eyes should be. Jason swerved, nearly running off the road. What the hell? When he looked again, the man's face was normal. Pale, but with eyes intact. Jason's mind raced. He wanted to stop the car, but something in him said no. "Don't. Keep driving." The man finally spoke again, his voice like a low growl. "You shouldn't have let me in." Jason's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" The man turned toward him fully now, his lips curling into a faint smile. "This road takes people places. Some don't come back." Jason's heart pounded. The fog outside had grown so thick he could barely see the road ahead. His headlights seemed swallowed whole by the night. "Pull over," the man said suddenly. His tone was commanding, sharp. Jason shook his head. "No way. I'm not stopping here." The man's smile widened. "You don't have a choice." And then Jason's engine died. The car coasted to a stop on the shoulder, surrounded by trees that pressed in like looming figures. Jason frantically turned the key, but nothing happened. Dead silence. He looked at the passenger seat. Empty. The man was gone. Jason's breath came fast, his chest tight. He scrambled out of the car, calling out, "Hello? Where the hell are you?" But the woods were silent. The gas station seemed impossibly far behind him now, though he'd only driven a few miles. The road stretched endlessly in both directions, no signs of life. And then he heard it, breathing, from the back seat. Jason turned slowly, dread clawing up his spine. Through the car's rear window, he saw him. The man, sitting perfectly still in the back seat, eyes wide, hands folded neatly over that canvas bag. Jason staggered back. His legs wouldn't move. His voice caught in his throat. The man leaned forward, pressing his face close to the glass. His mouth opened, impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged, broken teeth. And then the headlights of another car appeared in the distance. Jason blinked. Just like that, the man was gone. The back seat empty. The car engine roared back to life as if nothing had happened. Shaking, Jason floored it, speeding past the approaching vehicle. He didn't stop until he reached the next town, where he pulled into a well-lit diner and sat trembling in the driver's seat, trying to understand what had just happened. Later, when he told locals about the encounter, one old man at the counter shook his head. "You picked up the hitchhiker," the man said. "They say he's been around since the 50s. Folks see him near that old station by the Foothills. Some give him a ride, some don't. The ones who do, most never make it out. You're lucky you did." Jason never drove those roads at night again, and he never, ever stopped at a lonely gas station in the mountains. Kindness is a virtue, but on dark Appalachian roads, it can also be your undoing. Next time you see a hitchhiker by the pump, ask yourself, are you giving them a ride, or are they already waiting for you inside?